There are just some places around us that always seem to give us a deep sense of assurance, tranquility, hope, peace, and of all that is good and sacred in the world. However, there are also many sights or occurrences that serve up disturbing and unsettling memories of a very pivotal time in our history. Those reminders cause us to remember a time when all that had been deemed as high priority and sacred for many generations by a great majority would suddenly come under what seemed like a very brutal and vicious assault. I, for one, remember that time quite vividly. And in some ways, much of what we saw then seems like an exact replica of much of what we are experiencing today in our world. In the midst of what seemed like chaos, some spoke of a revolution. Many were crying peace, while others were crying war. Distinct groups were standing with their fists raised in protest, while others were quietly kneeling in prayer for God's divine intervention. They all were on a mission, and that mission was about changing the world. A popular group by the name of the Beatles came on the scene and seemed to take the country by storm during that time. They asked the question, "You say you want a revolution?" Yes, we all want to change the world. Many attempted to find commonality or unity under the banner of touting words like peace, power, love, when in all actuality, it was just the exact opposite for many that were touting it. Others opted to disconnect, as others wrote music inviting a generation to escape to what another popular group called Cloud 9. The 1960s and the early 70s brought with it great upheaval, uncertainty, and unrest in the world. The 60s were dominated by what was called the hippie generation, who raised their fingers to say peace, while others were raising their fists to say power. It was all about rebelling against what they called the establishment. What an unbelievable time of serious destabilization in the world. The world was turning for sure, and interestingly, the U.S. would elect its youngest president in the history of the nation. The first man would actually walk on the moon. The use of psychedelic drugs came roaring on the scene. Young people were introduced to them and began experimenting with them and other vices in epic proportion. The sexual revolution was at an all-time high. There were protests, violence in the street, and even sit-ins on college campuses.
A 12-hour sit-in at Sproul Hall on the Berkeley campus. That was the beginning, the largest of all the free speech demonstrations up to that time. 6,000 participated.
The Black Panther movement was formed. The Vietnam War began. The dreaded Cuban Missile Crisis loomed over us as a real threat and made headlines. The Civil Rights Movement came to the forefront. But sadly, and to our shock and horror, 3 of our nation's biggest headlines would be the assassinations of the 3 very well-known leaders, 2 political leaders, President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert Kennedy. along with a spiritual leader, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those three deaths, the war, and all of the other major maladies that were going on simultaneously really rocked the world. And for many, it sent their world spiraling completely out of control with fear and hopelessness. Marvin Gaye, one of the most popular artists of Tamla Records, a subsidiary of Motown, asked a question that seemed to echo the sentiments of a great majority of the people at that time. What's going on?
Talk to me, honey, so you can see what's going on. What's going on? Hey, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. Ooh.
During the 60s and into the 70s, the music of Motown and the rock music industry fueled and impassioned the listeners. Actually, at the close of the 60s, on August 15, 1969, a massive rock event called Woodstock, held in Bethel, New York, 50 miles outside of Woodstock, New York, would make huge headlines. Close to 500,000 people would attend what was being promoted as a festival of art and music, and would promote harmony, peace, and love. It would feature some of the most major headliners of the rock music industry during that time, with artists such as Jimi Hendrix, The Who, Janis Joplin, Johnny Winter, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Jefferson Airplane, 10 Years After, Joe Cocker, Joan Baez, Santana, and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Bethel was flooded by people of all ages, mainly a younger generation who felt it was a way to be both seen and heard through their amplification of coming together in one place. And come together, they did. The media had a huge presence there. And regardless of the lack of discretion shown as far as drugs and the public display of if it feels good, do it, the event would go on record as one of America's most memorable, historic, and highest attended secular events ever up to that point. But in spite of all of its planning and efforts to promote its success, thousands would still walk away greatly lacking any clear direction, completely empty and void of any real hope for the future, carrying a deep sense of foreboding, nagging, and heightened uncertainty about what was ahead. While on one side of the coin it appeared as if widespread chaos and hopelessness were seemingly prevailing and winning in the world, surprisingly much was waiting to be seen on the other side of that coin. As the world waved goodbye to 1969, the very early 70s rolled in with something amazingly significant and not short of miraculous. An unusual and different move was beginning to surface. Another kind of revolution was beginning to emerge. A new movement, if you will. This radical movement would go on to surprisingly and welcomely impact generations for several decades to come. It was the birthing of what would be called and reported in Time magazine's June 21st, 1971 issue as the Jesus Revolution. People like Fletch Wiley, a brilliantly talented musician, would be among those to experience a radical conversion, along with so many others, and would find that his life would be dramatically changed forever. In this new movement, new songs began to ring out throughout the country, and in some churches, like Take Me Back, Tell Them, Jesus is the Answer. The list just goes on. The same generation who asked the question, what's going on, were now beginning to find the answer and create a whole new world and destiny for themselves and the next generation to come. As we observe all that is going on in our world currently, many of my generation and of the past can attest to the fact that this is not the first time the world has spun out of control. Clearly, It is out of man's control, but not out of control of the one who upholds everything by the word of his power, who is sure to preserve us and future generations if we would only tell them his story and how it has been the anchor, rudder, and answer in the formation of our story for generations past and present, and is sure to be the answer for generations to come. Once again in our world, a deep stirring, cry, and deep need for the one who comes in between chaos and order, problem and solution, the same powerful influence and source of the past.
There's a guy shooting from the Mandalay Bank. He's been shot. Do we have medical set up somewhere yet? No, take him east. They're not going to come this way. Take him.
A source so much greater than ourselves, our political agendas, or our financial or social prowess. A cry so deep that it can only be heard and answered by the only one who has the power to bring not just a revolution, but one of the greatest reformations to this and future generations. Will you stand with us at one of the most significant opportunities in our time to see much of what has been lost restored? Will you lend your heart, voice, and support to see one of the greatest reformations in the history of our world to date? Are you one of the ones who will stand with us in this critically important time to stir this and future generations who are sure to see and experience something so unparalleled, so altogether incomparable to anything that this and previous generations could have ever even imagined? If so, then please join us on the journey in this vision and mission by sharing wisdom and insight that will release another generation to run their leg of the relay into a hope-filled future, poised to pass the baton to the ones coming after them. You can do this by contacting us at Relay Media Group to support this effort and pass your story on.
You can reach us by emailing info@rmg.tv or by visiting our website at www.rmg.tv. That's rmg.tv. You are also able to stay connected with us by visiting us on Facebook and following us on Twitter. For Twitter, it would be @RelayTheStory. That's @RelayTheStory. Together we stand poised to see and participate in one of the greatest yet most challenging times that is sure to impact and leave an indelible and lasting imprint on this and future generations to come. Thank you for your time, and may God bless you.